Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and if there's possibly anybody else out there in YouTube world other than ladies and gentlemen, hello to you too. Welcome to StoneCabinAdventures. I'm Lorelei. Kevin is behind the camera. We're ready for episode 9 of the life and times of Pinky Calhoun. So listen close, and if you don't know where we're at, go back and listen to or watch or whatever however you want to word that. Episode 8 or 7 or 6. You can start at the beginning. It's okay. It's episode 9. Those murderers Pinky's mama's talking. Those murderers killed the men of the wagon train first. They brutalized the boys and girls and the mothers. But the evilness didn't stop there. Those horrible men cut off body parts to save for trophies. I knew all those dead people. Those murdered settlers were my friends. They are all dead because someone lied. Rest assured, Letha, if you so much as hint that your baby's father is anyone but the real father, I will find out. And what you've been through today will seem like a Sunday school picnic compared to the plans I have for you then. I'll tell the whole town the truth about you. Letha sniveled and snorted. They'll all hate you. What truth exists that could make anyone hate me? I'll tell him Elmer's real daddy was an Indian. I'll tell him you were one of his squaws for a while. I wished I could poke my fingers in my ears. Ma made that belt pop and crack one more time. I wanted to line up right next to Letha so I wouldn't have to feel bad about lying. I was so much of a chicken, I should have sprouted feathers. Letha screamed and screeched. I don't think she shed a single tear because she was sorry. She only cried because she was mad. It didn't take Ma long to get tired of trying to beat the lies out of Letha. She sat down on the stall rail and, who is going to hate me? Trust me, neither your influence nor your father's influence is as impressive or as far-reaching as you seem to believe. Pa knows the governor, Letha sobbed out her threat. When the governor comes, we'll see who beats who. Pitkin, that governor? Ma brightened. I could hear the smile in her voice. Yes, that one, the new one. He and Pa are very nearly friends. I wondered how two people could almost be friends. I'm not almost friends with anybody. I either like them or I don't. Governor Pitkin isn't so gullible as to believe the claims of a braggart like your Pa. That's what you think. Pa even invited him to visit us out at the ranch. Governor Pitkin is less tolerant of liars than I am. He might recommend your Pa beat you for lying. I couldn't believe Letha had it in her to think of something even more stupid, but she did. She spit at Ma and called her the nastiest word in the world. My eyes popped nearly as far open as my mouth did. I looked at Ma to see how she'd take it. She just sighed and held out her hand to me. I just knew she was going to beat me for lying too. I held up my bandaged hand. Ma patted my head, and we walked together into the house. I smiled inside. I hadn't gotten the whipping I deserved. Ma sat me in Pa's chair and turned me sideways at the table. She held up my feet and slid my chair around to prop my. I need to rewrite that part. She turned my chair around and propped my feet up on my chair so my knees wouldn't have to bend. I'm not sure if she did it to keep my knees from hurting or to keep from tearing up her stitching. Ma doesn't like to have to redo work. I never walk on her fresh mop floors. I've had to remop a time or two when I did. Now I'm more careful. Ma fixed my lunch and fed me. I felt like such a baby, but she shushed me. I want you to keep those bandages clean so you can heal quickly. After all, you have a big fish out there that you need to catch when you're well. I looked at my bandages. Earlier today, They'd been a little bloody. I guess while I took another nap, she cleaned them up again. The new bandages were made of fresh fabric. Would soaking them in salt water help? We'll try that tomorrow. Tonight we'll dose them with sweet oil. They should start itching tomorrow or the next day. Itching is a sign of healing. They still hurt something awful when I forget and try to use them. Imagine they do. You're lucky you still have hands. You tore them up quite badly. What are you going to do, Talitha? Ma stared at me for a few minutes. I don't know. She's as stubborn as a crosswise mule. I doubt anyone can beat sense into her. I knew it could get my behind whipped, but I spat out the words while I was feeling brave. I'm never lying again, not even to Rufus Gates. That's good to know. Ma smiled and nearly laughed. You didn't like spanking Letha. No, I didn't. I hate to admit it, but I'm not sure it did any good. I giggled at that. I knew it stopped me from lying again. We heard boots clunk out by the front door and turned to see who was there. Elmer's face was nearly the same color as red as the stripes on Letha's behind. He squinched his eyes shut like he always did when he came in from outside. So, Ma, you got any plans for that rabid she-wolf down in the barn? We both smiled at his description of Letha. Why, son, what did you have in mind? I've never heard such filthy words in my life. I thought maybe leaving her there for a few more hours might mellow her out. If that doesn't help, mayhap some of that pepper sauce Pa puts on everything he eats would warm her hind end a little better. Lord have mercy, did I leave her skirt tails up over her head? Ma jumped up to go remedy her forgetfulness. Relax, I got it. I overcame my temptation to put a handprint on each fat cheek first, but I dropped her skirts around her ankles. I couldn't imagine how, but his face went even brighter red. I'll never hit a woman I love, but I loved the idea of swatting that brat's backside. Well, thank you for not embarrassing her further. Elmer laughed, and he sounded just like Pa, which, now that I knew he wasn't Pa's blood, made me wonder just how much of who he was had to do with his birth parents and how much had to do with Ma and Pa. Oh, I didn't say I hadn't embarrassed her. I walked around her and talked to her for several minutes before I dropped her skirts. I even lay down on the hay in the pen so I could talk to her face to face. She acted like she planned to spit on me. So I put the point of my knife in her nose. I told her I would cut off her nose and feed it to the pig. She swallowed her spit and her ugly words. That surprised me. You'd have cut her nose off? I couldn't believe he could be so mean, even if she deserved it. Relax, Pinky, I doubt I could have done it. But she didn't know whether I would or not, so she didn't spit on me. She could be taught. You just have to be deadly firm with her. Deadly firm. I wondered how Elmer had convinced that evil girl that he could be deadly anything. Ma, what happens when she lies to Governor Pitkin? Ma smiled her tender smile at me. My first husband was Charles Pitkin, the governor's cousin. I doubt anything Mr. Gates says will sway Governor Pitkin one way or the other. I held that bit of knowledge in my head. The governor was my relative. Maybe being a mayor wouldn't be such a bad thing after all, if they let me. I figured I had some growing up to do first. Chapter 5. My Funeral, June 1880. For the next 2 weeks, I only thought of dying. Well, I thought of how to keep from dying. I couldn't catch my breath. I couldn't even do my chores. I could sleep. I could do that. I slept all the time, even when I didn't want to. Ma kept me really close to her. I slept all the time. Even outside in the summer heat, I froze. They wrapped me in blankets and laid me in the sun, and lazy like a cat, I slept. Ma made beef broth and hot water with honey, all for me. Staying awake used up too much strength. I couldn't get warm. I wondered if I'd ever really been warm. I'd have cried, but that took too much energy. Finally, Paul went after Dr. Fishface. Doctor's name is really Dr. Fishbach. At least that's what the sign over his door says. No one calls him his real name, and he answers to Fishface. He'd probably answer to anything if the people calling him had money or whiskey in their hands. I'd gone to sleep on the settle again. Ma offered to put a fire in the fireplace. I couldn't see the sense in that. Everybody else had trouble getting cool enough. I woke up with Dr. Fishface thumbing up one of my eyelids. He peeked under my blanket and under my skirt. I kicked at him. As wore out as I was, I couldn't hit him nearly as hard as I kicked that river monster. He got all huffy, but Elmer stood up for me. So, Doc, do you normally go peeking under little girls' dresses? Seems to me if you ask your patients what you wanted to know, you'd find them a little bit more cooperative. He grumped around, but Pa had cash money and Doc knew it. I felt bad about that. I figured Doc Fishface was using me like a tool to pry the money out of Pa's wallet. Doc pulled up my blankets again, and as he grabbed my skirt tail, Elmer forced the doctor's hand back down with his knife. Like I said, tell her what you got in mind. Doc tried to move past Elmer's knife, but gave up. You can tell her yourself. Pa, Elmer yelled. Doc says he's done all he can do. I don't see that he's done anything besides to peek under her dress. I'd let him walk back to town if he can't help. Pa came back in the house. What's amiss? Your daughter's well enough to kick me. I could hear the smile in Pa's voice. Well, that's good. That means she's getting better. Elmer argued the point. Pa, he keeps trying to look under her skirts. I'm thinking he wants to see how her knees are healing, but he won't talk to her. How's he supposed to figure out what's wrong if he won't ask her? Doc? I need to turn my phone off. Doc? Pa used the voice that means he already knows the truth, but he's given me the chance to explain before I get a paddling. Sometimes my excuses have been entertaining enough that I didn't get swats. Not usually, but I always try. I don't play games with my patients. That's good. She's too sick for games. I rode 12 miles into town to get you. I rode 12 miles back out here so you could figure out why she's still ailing. I still have that same 24-mile round trip to make again later today when I take you back to town. I don't figure the wounds on her hands and her knees are the problem. They seem to be healing just fine. Caroline sewed them up. She took out the stitches a couple of days ago. Her hands and knees aren't hot. They're not swollen. We've seen no red lines coming out of them. I don't think those injuries are the problem. Something broke inside her. She can't stay warm. I don't know that she needs you fluffing her skirt tails and chilling her. Which is why Elmer thinks you should talk to her. Okay then, Miss Pinky Calhoun, what's wrong with you? I breathed as deep as ever I could before explaining. I can swim and hold my breath to 487. I feel like I've been underwater for at least 500. No matter how much I breathe, I don't have enough air. Well, that was more talking than I'd done since the day after I got hurt. I hadn't walked alone in more than a week. I couldn't take a step without one knee or the other dropping me to the ground. My hands still hurt so bad I couldn't catch myself. I felt like such a baby. I felt, rather than saw, Doc rock back on his heels. Pinky, I'm going to pinch your finger. I need to see how long the pinch mark stays. It shouldn't hurt. I slid one hand out from under the covers. He picked up my hand and rubbed it gently in his own. You're cold. He sounded surprised. I felt him pinching my fingertips. Part of your problem is you're dehydrated. Do you know what that means? I breathed out loud and tried to shake my head. It means you don't have enough water in your body. My eyebrows knitted wrinkles into my forehead for just a second. Then, worn out, I dozed off. I snoozed for a few seconds, until he poked my finger with a knife. I felt that shiver start between my shoulder blades and ricochet from my head to my feet and back the other direction. When he didn't poke me again, I closed my eyes. I woke up sitting on Paul's lap at the table. Paul noticed I woke up, and he held my cup to my mouth. I sipped it and nearly choked to death. It's a tonic, Doc explained. I make it mostly from green vegetables. You need to drink a cup of it every day. I brought a jar of it with me, but I have to come back in 4 days to bring you more of it. I choked down the rest of Doc's dead garden so Pa's money wouldn't be wasted. I didn't want to die. I wondered if Doc was my only hope. I didn't mean it, but I whispered, "Thank you." Elmer handed Pa another cup. He held it to my mouth. I'd have shook my head, but I couldn't. I knew it had to have a worse tonic in it. I tasted honey water, ambrosia, whatever that means. I read it in a book, but they were drinking wine. It almost got the taste of that nasty tonic out of my mouth. Then I woke up again, and we were in the wagon jouncing on our way to church. I had lost the rest of Saturday and all of Saturday night, and Ma and Pa sat in the front, and someone had piled the wagon full of hay. Me and Elmer lay in the back. He kept the wind from blowing my blankets away. The next thing I knew, Pastor was walking up and down on the wall. Our old pastor yelled all the time, even when he was happy. Pastor Riggins just talks to us while he walks back and forth and back and forth. He'd moved the pulpit to the wall and walked up and down behind it. I closed my eyes to see if that would help him make sense. It didn't. I remember him saying something about no greater love. I still couldn't figure out why he didn't walk on the floor like normal. Miss Abigail Kruger walked on the wall to the pulpit to sing. She sang the same song that she sang for old Mrs. Gates's funeral. That's when I figured out I was dead. Rufus's grandmother had been some special kind of old. Her hair had been the softest white curls. I wished I could have saved it. Tarry with me, O my Savior, and on thy bosom now I rest, meant I had died. If I found old Mrs. Gates in heaven, I was going to run my fingers through her hair for at least 1,000 years. When I figured out I had to be stretched out in a coffin, I realized Pastor hadn't been walking up and down on the wall. I didn't know why they'd laid me on my side. All the other dead people I'd seen had been flat of their backs. All but that hanged man, he dangled from the rope. He'd been fat. I had just enough time to wonder if anyone ever got fat enough that their heads popped off when they got hanged before Miss Abigail's song was over and Mr. Harkin traded her places. I'd never seen Mr. Harkin at church before. I wondered why he showed up today. Then I figured he is here for my funeral. I burped a little, and all I could taste was that nasty tonic from the dock. It didn't seem fair. I had to keep tasting it even after I was dead. Not fair at all. Mr. Harkin walked to the front as Miss Kruger walked back to her seat. She paused to kiss me on the forehead. Her lips were soft and warm. She smelt like a flower. It still didn't make up for having to taste that nasty tonic. Mr. Harkin's voice squawked at first. I didn't understand a word of what he said while he was making those chicken noises. Soon enough, though, he got lined out. Miss Pinky saved my life. No one else would have come to look for me in time. She had to walk deep into my mind, alone. Not many adults would have done that. She's a brave little warrior. She knows what it means to have that kind of love that makes you put others first. She has that no greater love that your sky pilot talked about. He sniffed and blew his nose. Pinky, you have to get better. Rosie and the chickens miss you, and I haven't had any fresh bread since you got hurt. He walked slowly toward me. I want you to have this. He held up a package wrapped in brown paper, like from Mr. Kruger's store. I bet he knew I saved every bit of string Ma brought home. He had wrapped string around and around that package. I smiled and felt a little giggle sneak out. I don't know how long it had been since I laughed. Probably before I got hurt. He put the package under my blanket and moved one of my hands to cover it. I wiggled my fingers until I got one of them under one of the strings. I only had time to wonder if blankets in coffins had a special name before I went to sleep again. I woke up at home. I lay there watching the moon through the kitchen window. It started at the very top and slowly made its way to the bottom, and then it sank into the ground. Ma, she was next to me, holding me in an instant. What is it, lovey? I'm hungry, Ma. Can I have a bite of anything? Hungry? She snorted like she wanted to laugh, but didn't know how. Sure, what do you want? Do we have any milk? It must be years since Pa and I ate milk and cookies. Ma choked on something. Her voice sounded like she could barely breathe. I'll have to go to the well. I've got some cooling in there. I'll go, Ma. I heard Elmer jamming his feet into his boots. He sounded like homespun, rubbing on old bark. I'll be right back. Ma held me and petted me. I want to go to the river, but I couldn't stand the thought of not swimming and not catching my huge fish. And to do either, I'd have to unwrap my blanket. Do I have to drink some tonic before I drink the milk? No, you don't. You don't ever have to drink tonic again if you don't want to. I hate it, but I think it makes me better. I felt Ma's whole body jump. What? Ma squeezed me a little tighter, like she feared I might leave. It tastes like boiled turnip tops and weeds. I couldn't tell if she was laughing or crying. It looks like boiled weed juice. Can we have steak for supper? I want sliced tomatoes with mine. Then I knew Ma was crying. Her tears landed on my head. I'll fix anything you want. You should make some bread and let Mr. Harkin eat with us. He got nobody to make him some bread. Elmer handed Ma a cup of milk, and she held it while I drank. Hey, Pinkers, you want me to help you open your package? We all been wondering what Mr. Harkin gave you. You mean the package he put under my hand at my funeral? Ma lost it then. She howled like a coyote. I didn't know Pa was in the house, but he took me out of Ma's arms and handed me to Elmer. Pa held Ma, and she cried loud and sad. I guess I wasn't the only one who thought I had died. We all sat on the settle. Ma sniffed into her hanky while she sat on Pa's lap. I hadn't seen her do that since I was a little kid. Pa patted her hair and kissed her and whispered sweet things to her. And Elmer tucked my head under his chin. I got to breathe my own warm air, and I got to breathe Elmer's warm air. The warm air helped. Elmer handed me the package. I tried to open it, but my fingers hurt. Ow! Why's my finger so sore? That's where Doc pokes you to see if you're getting better. He isn't sure. I went to sleep and dreamed that Mr. Harkin's gift held a new pair of boots and a new blue dress. I remembered the boots being brown and then black. And soon enough, they changed to the same color of blue as my new dress. I woke up hearing Elmer laugh. We all sat at the table. Sure enough, Mr. Harkin was there, and we had snakes, And we had steaks and homemade bread and radishes because it was too early for tomatoes. I tried to open the package. Since I sat on his lap, Pa helped. Elmer got my ball of string out of my treasure box under my bed and brought it downstairs. He tied the new string from Mr. Harkin's package onto my old string ball and wound it round and round and round. I never had a piece that long before without knots in it. Pa helped me unwind the brown paper. Ma folded it up and saved it. She'd use it to make patterns for clothes or for grocery lists. I couldn't imagine how he got my boots folded up so small. Or my dress either, come to that. He hadn't. It was a tiny pocket made of black soft leather, like the little bags he puts his gold in. And just like the pig he butchered last fall. The strings were long enough to tie around my waist. The pocket was flat but heavy. What kind of leather did you use to make it weigh so much? I put my heart inside, open it up and see. Mr. Harkin smiled right at me. I'd never seen him smile before. It completely changed his face. I always thought he was an old man. When he smiled, he barely looked older than Rufus. I struggled to get 2 fingers inside the drawstrings. Pa took the bag and slowly poured it into my hands. 6 little hearts? Ma asked. Should be 7. She's 7, isn't she? 8 at Christmas, I bragged. Pa shook the little leather bag again and another heart fell out. Yes, sir, 7 little hearts. I know she's too young for it. Pa's whole body tightened up hard like a rock. Is it? I don't get much gold out of that mine. A few days before Pinky found me, I'd been looking for a new place to cache my hoard. I had just tossed what I had in the hiding hole not 1 minute before I heard the Gateses yelling at me to come out of the house. I thought about not coming out, but I figured they'd burn my house down. Elmer blurted out the horrible truth. Letha told me they planned to tell everyone that Pa fathered her baby. Mr. Harkin laughed. Mr. Gates told me I was the baby's father and that I had to marry Letha. I'd rather die. You'd be a horrible Pa. The words were out of my mouth before I knew I was going to say something. Mr. Harkin laughed till his face turned purple. Don't I know it? He finally asked. I'd be the worst Pa ever. I'm sorry for that girl, but I am not taking the blame for someone else's sins. Pa put a bloody piece of steak in my mouth. I chewed slowly, tasting every bit of it. Even as I ate that bite, I wondered if Pa gave me that to keep me from talking. It seemed likely that he would think of something like that. I put my little hearts on the table. I opened my mouth like a baby bird, and Pa gave me another little bite of steak. That's quite a pretty gift. Ma reached out her hand. Pa lifted one of the hearts off the table and put it in Ma's hand. Heavy, too. Gold is heavy, Mr. Harkin explained. Gold? Ma and Elmer shouted their surprise at the same time. The look on Elmer's face said he never believed Mr. Harkin had any gold. Yeah, I don't have anything else valuable enough to say thank you to her for rescuing me. I swallowed, then suggested, you could give me a baby piggy when Rosie has her babies. He cleared his throat twice before he could talk. I don't have a daddy pig. Rosie isn't going to have babies. Oh, yes, she is. I letted her out when the wild pigs come close a couple times. I had to bribe her back in her pen with a bucket of blackberries from down by the river. I bet she has little black piggies. She pretended to be married with that big old black pig that runs a wild herd. He's the one that has the curled around tusks. I want those tusks for bracelets. I could feel the grown-ups looking at each other. Pa broke the silence. Rosie could have run off with the wild pigs. I waved away his worries. Oh, she does that every time, but she always comes back for her blackberries. I had to let her, I put, I had to let her run with them, but I put some molasses on her blackberries, and she don't even care the other pigs leave her. But I didn't have another way to make sure she got friendly with the big black pig. Mr. Harkin coughed and choked and then laughed out loud. Here's the deal then. When Rosie has her babies, your paw can have pick of the litter and you can have the runt. You need to keep the hearts though. I laughed a tiny soft sound. That's good. I'll name mine Buddy Bacon. We'll have eaten the other Buddy by then. I felt my head tipping over backwards. I didn't want to go to sleep, but I'd been awake for a long time. I tried hard to stay sitting up, but even as my head tipped backwards over Pa's arm, my eyes slid shut. My last thought before I slept was, I have finally gotten warm. Thank you so much for listening. Come back next week for episode 10. That Pinky, she just keeps getting in more trouble. Welcome to Stone Cabin Adventures. Kevin and Lorelai, we both love you. We appreciate every comment you make. We would even appreciate rude comments. I mean, that sounds funny, but as long as they're honest comments, we can learn from it. So we appreciate it. And we're so glad we're so grateful that you're subscribed, that you click the like button, that you ring the notification bell, that you listen to this. We are just grateful and we thank you. Mwah. Y'all have a wonderful evening.